Welcome to episode 3 of the LatinX Point of View podcast. I'm your host, Leo Scarpati, along with my co-host, Gina Esquivel. And on today's episode, we'll be discussing what is civic responsibility.
We show up on the streets. So to me, when I see some of the civic responsibility of showing up for our protest, is that, some people say that's not civic responsibility. And I wonder what do you think about what you think is part of our civic duty?
Oh, definitely, 100%. I mean, to me, it's embedded in the First Amendment.
LatinX Point of View is brought to you by Civic Canvas, a bilingual boutique firm designing strategies for social change. To learn more at civiccanvas.com. Hey, Leonardo.
Hey, Gina, how are you?
Very good, very good. I was, again, checking my news feed, and I'm watching all these people coming up with different things around showing up support for the right, the left, for the middle. And it just dawned on me, this whole idea of civic responsibility is quite a topic. And I would love to hear your feedback or point of view on what do you think is civic responsibility?
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I've been thinking about this also. To me, I've always equated when everybody says civic responsibility, there's a lot of things that go into it, right? It could be paying your taxes. It could be, serving on a jury. It could be being called as a witness to court. So there's a lot of different things. But for me, one of the things that stands out is the right to vote. So registering to vote and voting. That's one of the things that stands out to me when I think of civic responsibility.
Voting is like the ultimate, I think, for anyone that you kind of, that's the top of the mountain when it comes to civic responsibility. Maybe not the top of the mountain, but it's one of your basic things that you want to do.
Yeah, it's interesting that you equated to top of mountain, but for some people, it doesn't seem like a big priority unless there's some sort of interest in it for them. Unfortunately, in the U.S., we've had lower voter turnout at some midterm elections, and people tend to put in more of an emphasis in presidential elections. And those numbers get lower as you get to local and county elections, where I really think that a lot of the things are more important to where those types of elections are more important to the average citizen than maybe a presidential.
And I agree with you because particularly when I first became U.S. citizen, I thought that, even though my adult life is here, I kept thinking about presidential. But then the midterm elections became really important, a way for you to kind of really get into it, even get warm up for the presidential. But then it requires a lot of kind of digging and understanding. And when you think about local, so there is a list of people that you're supposed to vote for. And while I was actually, now that you remind me, I was heading a voting campaign about 3 years ago. And one of the things that it came clear to me while I was learning was that we don't cast one vote. We cast, and actually we could Google this, but it's, you vote so many times that it makes it a complex and very simple process for people to be kind of show up and say, this is what I believe.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when we do go to vote, it's not like we're voting for one person. So when we go to the booth, a lot of times we'll have 3-4 pages worth on the ballot. Sometimes there's complex issues that come up that can confuse people. And to be honest with you, I think sometimes elected officials are those who are wanting to pass a law and want a referendum from the general public. I think they make some of those kind of ballot initiatives a little bit more technical or a little bit confusing to the average person in order to kind of skew how they want the results to turn out.
Absolutely. And they manipulate the number of people whichever way, and we get information or we don't get information. And I'm trying to think of different ways that I've been manipulated into or maybe have given information. Because when I was growing up, there was this idea about voting and being civically engaged in all the processes. And I was very small when I first joined one of those partidos that, kind of rally against someone. And so I grew up knowing that the voting that was part of your responsibility. While here, it became a very complex way to understand my right. Um, and I couldn't, and there was not a lot of help, so I had to rely a lot on the media to kind of get me through it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I think we all have different experiences when we're younger, especially when it comes to how it shapes our idea or our thought process on voting. I can be honest with you, I can remember the first election where I was rooting for as a kid for a presidential election. And it was, I'm going to date myself. Oh man, I'm going to date myself a little bit. I was a kid and it was the 1988 election of George Bush and Michael Dukakis. And I remember my dad specifically telling me, if George Bush is elected, I'm going to be out of a job. And I said, and as a kid, you don't understand that. But for some reason to me, whether it was on TV, whatever, George Bush appealed more to me than Michael Dukakis did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, sure enough, President Bush is elected. My dad's job, they go on strike, da 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 da. He ends up, losing that job that he had, and kind of what he had felt that was going to happen if this person was elected kind of came true. So it was one of those things where I started to see early on the impact of what an election can be. It doesn't always have to be a national one like the president, but just seeing what the results of election can have on a family and on people.
Mm-hmm. But it takes time to understand. I guess I'm still going back to, it takes time to understand what all that means.
Oh, definitely.
And for someone like me who grew up in a different electoral system, breaking it all down and knowing that, well, do I really matter? And for people who actually don't have documentation, doesn't matter to them. And the closer I get to people, the more I understand how local government works and what are the pluses of you exercising a vote. And that's really, you actually get to shake the hand of your candidate in local forums, and you can actually go a little bit more informed. But I still feel that there is a gap of what it means to me be a civic responsible individual and truly exercising my right to vote with being informed and really truly understanding. So am I just going to go and vote and feel that I did my duty, or am I going to go and research to know that my civic responsibility is being enforced the right way?
Active participation. So I think that's kind of what you were looking for. So am I going to actively participate in the election? And you're right, that does take a little bit more of a job because I think the basic civic responsibility is to go vote. But that active participation part, that's that next step. That's that am I gonna research what these folks who are running for elected office stand for? What do these ballot initiatives mean to me and my family? And to be honest with you, a lot of times, no. Here in the U.S., we're mostly based on a two-party system, and once someone gets into their mind, whether either I'm a Democrat or a Republican, a lot of the times they vote down the ticket, which I always tell people, look at who you're voting for. I never tell anybody vote down a party line. I am a registered independent. So I'm a registered independent, which means that every time I got to go into an election, if it's an election where I have to pick a specific party, at the time that I'm going to go vote is when I kind of, I guess, I don't want to say register, but I elect which party I want to vote for and who I want to vote for. So I have to do double my homework before I step into a voting booth.
Absolutely. But that's, and I guess to me, it gets really difficult when you're having to move through a lot of the understanding the cultural barriers of exercising that civic responsibility. One that to me is actually comes really easy. So voting, I became a citizen, give it or take, about 10 years ago. And I was, I went to vote and exercise it, and it felt, that you actually achieved that milestone for an immigrant. That is, exercise your right to vote. But I know there's some people that want to have that right and don't have it. And to me, and the ones that do have it don't exercise it. But I could also understand the conditions to why they don't, because there is so much confusion. There is so much misinformation. And how do you come down to be responsible about who you vote for? Actually, there was one friend of mine who went to vote, and she says, "I just had a bunch of yeses," and to me, it's like, well, did you just kind of like uh, really did not exercise your right to vote responsibly?
Yeah.
It's like if you drink, drink responsibly. If you vote, vote responsibly.
That's true. I like that. I like that. And actually, I think you're right. Funny thing, did a quick Google search. Yeah, I'm a victim of that. But I was looking at some of the numbers, and on national elections, on average, there's about a 60% turnout for presidential, and that number is even lower when it comes to midterms, to about 40%. I think this past year, 2018, we saw those numbers up for the midterm elections, which is a positive thing. And I can tell you something. In just researching some of this, the Pew Research Center kind of put out some statistics on Latino voters or Hispanic voters, where they said that there was an increase in first-time Hispanics voting in the 2018 midterms, 27% increase of that, which to me is a positive thing. That means Hispanic Latinos are paying attention to what's going on. We're seeing that not only the presidential elections matter, that the midterms matter. We just need to get those numbers up and down towards our local elections, because we need to start making sure that we vote at the state, county, city, municipal levels also.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when I think about why Latinos, in my case, watching some of the folks in the community, why they came out to vote, one, we're getting people who are actually adjusting their status as a U.S. citizen, maybe people who had a resident card for many, many years. And given some of the circumstances and change in policy, they went ahead and got their citizenship. And they went ahead and got informed and exercised their vote. Some other people that I spoke with, they actually felt that they knew what was, even they didn't know the candidates, they knew what party they wanted to support. And it was easier for them to maneuver through the parties and, like, well, I know who I'm going for, and the other ones I just make homework. Or so I could see that, Latinos, and that's something that for me is like the hidden secret, or the hidden, I don't want to say weapon, but it is a weapon of democracy, and how we are growing in numbers to say that we are the minority. And we will dictate eventually the election of many, many local, state, and federal seats. And to me, that's something that we hold such power that we want to be able to use that power responsibly. I'm going back to the civic part, and kind of making me think about, maybe I'm talking to myself, because how much time did I truly spend researching people?
Sure. No, and I think you're absolutely right. Political parties for years now have been targeting Hispanic Latino voters in that next wave of what's going to be really impactful going forward. One of the things that I think matters is the message. So I think a lot of times, and I worked on a campaign in 2008 where I was in Miami at the time, and there was a kind of think tank type group that came in, and they wanted to poll Hispanic Latinos in Miami. Mm-hmm. And what we found was that things that matter to Hispanic Latinos in Miami in 2008 were different than the Hispanic Latinos in Texas that they had polled, which were different than the Hispanic Latinos in New York that they had polled, and were different from the Hispanic Latinos in LA that they had polled. So this organization, this company, thought that they were going to get across the board mm-hmm. to identify all Latinos as caring about one subject or another. And I told them, nah, man, you can't put us in that box.
Yeah.
Depending on where we're at, depending on where we're from, depending on where our circumstances are, we're going to have things that are important to us. So I recall specifically in 2008, I think it was in Texas, education was really big for Hispanic Latinos at the time. In LA, it was the issue of immigration. And in Miami, I'm having trouble recalling. I think it might have been either tied with healthcare or education. Mm-hmm. So, they were kind of a little dumbfounded because they were expecting to see similar results across the board. And I said, nah, man, you're not going to get that.
Yeah, no. And that actually shows how much we assume about the Latinos. And I don't speak for Latinos. You don't speak for
No,
Latinos. And we
no.
know our diversity. And within each country, let's say if we divide ourselves by countries, you still find more diversity within and diversity of thought. And depending geographically, we're